He was just the janitor everyone ignored, until a battle-scarred K-9 found him and exposed the deadly secrets buried beneath their very feet. Here's what happened. But before we get into the story, drop a comment below. Let us know where you're watching from. The storm that rolled over Briarwood that night wasn't the kind that merely rattled windows. It howled through the cracked bones of the old school like a warning no one could decipher. Lightning split the sky as rain pelted the sagging roof. And in that chaos, a shadow moved with purpose through the front gates. A beast of muscle and scars, his coat darkened by the downpour, his every step measured like a soldier advancing through hostile territory. Valor wasn't a stray. The bullet wounds healed into jagged reminders across his flanks, told a story of battles fought far from the quiet streets of Briarwood. But it wasn't war he was stalking this night. It was something or someone hidden deep within these forgotten halls. As the clock struck midnight, the storm reached its crescendo, and Valor paused at the rusted maintenance door, his head tilted slightly, nostrils flaring against the scent of old floor wax, rusted pipes, and something else. His massive paw scratched against the metal with a low, guttural whine, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the building. Inside that closet, behind layers of dust and forgotten tools, Mr. Holden sat perfectly still, his hands folded neatly over a faded photograph, the corners curled and brittle with age. His eyes, clouded by years yet sharp as ever, stared into the darkness as if expecting this moment to arrive. And when the handle began to rattle, when the door shook under the weight of Valor's insistence, he didn't rise, didn't run. He simply whispered under his breath, "It's time, old friend." The door creaked open not by the force of human hands, but by the relentless push of a creature that knew precisely where he was meant to be. Valor stood there, rain dripping from his muzzle, eyes locked onto the man the world had forgotten. For a long, breathless moment, they simply stared at one another, the storm outside dimming beneath the weight of history crashing silently between them. Then, without a sound, Valor stepped inside and laid his massive head on Mr. Holden's lap, a gesture so filled with recognition and sorrow it could have broken stone. And as thunder rumbled overhead, Mr. Holden reached down with a trembling hand, his fingers brushing through the soaked fur, his voice barely audible over the storm. "You found me," he said, his words heavy with regret and something far more dangerous. Unfinished business. Outside, the rain washed away the footprints, but inside that janitor's closet, the past had found its way home, and nothing would ever be the same again. By noon, the whispers had turned into full-blown speculation, spreading through the cracked hallways of Briarwood High faster than wildfire in a dry canyon. Students gathered in hushed clusters, their eyes darting toward the old maintenance wing where the air seemed heavier, charged with a tension none of them could explain. Teachers avoided the subject entirely, their nervous glances betraying a fear they didn't dare put into words. And through it all, Valor remained a sentinel, his powerful frame stretched across the threshold of the janitor's closet, his amber eyes never blinking, never straying from the door behind which Mr. Holden sat like a forgotten relic of another life. When Officer Merrick, a man built like a brick wall with a badge, arrived with a regulation K-9 harness in hand, his confidence lasted exactly 3 seconds. The moment the leash clicked against the metal clasp, Valor's body coiled like a compressed spring and exploded into motion, breaking free with a force that left Merrick stumbling. The massive German shepherd sprinted down the darkened corridor, claws skidding across faded linoleum, a low growl rising from deep within his chest as he barreled toward the janitor's closet. The officers gave chase, but Valor was a phantom, a force of nature driven by loyalty that no uniform could contain. When they reached the door, breathless and confused, they found it locked, until Valor hurled himself against it with such ferocity the hinges groaned in protest. And when the door finally creaked open under the relentless assault, the scene inside wasn't chaos. It was something far more unsettling. Mr. Holden stood perfectly still in the narrow beam of sunlight filtering through the grimy window, his weathered hands raised, not trembling but calm, his eyes focused on the officers with a resignation that felt almost rehearsed. Valor immediately took his place at the man's feet, his head bowed low in deference, his body positioned like a soldier reporting back to his commander after a long and harrowing mission. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, their hands twitching near their holsters. But no commands were given, no handcuffs produced. There was something in the air that held them frozen, a silent understanding that whatever was unfolding here went far beyond their jurisdiction or training. Outside the cracked windows, the gathering storm clouds reflected the growing unease, their dark shapes swirling like memories too dangerous to confront. And just like that, the man who had spent years fading into the background of broken lockers and stained floors became the center of every conversation, every rumor, every anxious glance exchanged in the quiet corners of town. Mothers pulled their children closer when they walked past the school gates. Veterans passing through town paused and stood a little straighter at the mere mention of his name. Because suddenly, Mr. Holden wasn't just a janitor anymore. He was a question no one had the courage to ask, and a story that refused to stay buried. Jamie Collins had never been the kind of kid who cared much for authority. His days spent skirting the edge of expulsion and his nights wandering streets that felt colder than they should for a boy of 17. But there was something about Mr. Holden that refused to settle quietly in the back of his mind, something that made the hairs on his arms rise every time the janitor passed by, silent and watchful, his eyes carrying the weight of unsaid things. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the air hung thick and restless, and Jamie found himself once again stuck in detention for reasons that didn't matter anymore. He'd been carving his initials into the corner of his desk when the door creaked open and Mr. Holden walked in, pushing his mop with the kind of precision and focus that seemed unnecessary for cleaning floors. Jamie might have ignored him, like everyone else did, if it weren't for the moment Mr. Holden reached up to adjust the crooked clock above the blackboard. For just a second, the flannel sleeve slid back, revealing a strip of skin weathered like old leather and marked with ink that had long since faded from bold black to a ghostly gray. Jamie's eyes locked on it immediately. Numbers, precise and deliberate, etched near the wrist like a map only the lost could read. Coordinates. Jamie knew enough from the hours he spent glued to his phone, searching for places he'd never see, to recognize them for what they were. But why would a janitor have something like that permanently burned into his skin? And why did his fingers, thick and scarred, tremble for just a heartbeat before he yanked the sleeve back down as if the ink itself could summon memories better left forgotten? From that moment, Jamie couldn't stop thinking about it. He followed Mr. Holden with his eyes, watched the way he moved through the halls with calculated precision, never turning his back fully to anyone, always scanning corners as if expecting something or someone to emerge from the shadows. He noticed the other tattoos too, just brief flashes when the flannel sleeve slipped up or the collar sagged lower than usual. Symbols he didn't recognize, foreign shapes that spoke of places far beyond the faded streets of Briarwood. And in the center of it all, near the inside of his forearm, was the most unsettling mark of all. A simple emblem of a scorpion curled in a defensive posture, its tail raised as if ready to strike. That night, Jamie sat in his room, the coordinates burned into his mind, fingers flying across his cracked phone screen as he searched for their meaning. When the map finally centered, his blood ran cold. The coordinates pointed to a stretch of land deep in a desert across the ocean, a place marked only by the words "restricted military zone," and a history buried beneath layers of classified secrecy. And in that moment, Jamie understood. Mr. Holden wasn't just a man who'd seen things. He was a man who had survived things the rest of the world had no idea existed. The storm outside had quieted into a steady drizzle by the time the last lights flickered off in Briarwood High, but inside that forgotten wing of the school, the air felt charged, as if the building itself held its breath. The old utility room where Mr. Holden kept his cot was little more than a closet tucked behind stacks of rusted equipment and forgotten supplies. But that night it became the center of something far larger than anyone understood. Valor lay curled at the foot of the cot, his massive frame coiled tight, his head resting against Mr. Holden's worn boots as if standing guard even in sleep. His ears twitched at every creak of the old pipes, his breathing low and controlled like a soldier trained to rest with one eye open. Mr. Holden sat in the thin light of a single exposed bulb, his elbows resting on his knees, his fingers turning a faded photograph over and over again between calloused hands. His eyes didn't. Hold the weariness of a man who cleaned up after careless children all day. They held the weight of things left undone, of promises made long ago that even now pressed down on his shoulders heavier than any burden he'd carried through these halls. When his fingers brushed against the edge of the floorboard beneath his cot, a slight tremor ran through him, so subtle it could have been mistaken for the chill of the night air. But Valor noticed. The dog lifted his head, his eyes meeting Mr. Holden's with a depth of understanding that no words could match. Without a sound, Valor rose and placed his paw gently against that same floorboard, his claws tracing the grain of the wood like he remembered something buried deep beneath it. For a moment, the air grew unbearably still, and Mr. Holden closed his eyes as if battling ghosts no one else could see. Outside, the rain whispered against the windows, and somewhere down the dark corridors of the school, the old clock tower groaned its midnight lament. But neither man nor beast moved from that silent vigil. Rumors had already begun to twist through the student body like smoke through a broken vent. Some said Mr. Holden was a fugitive from a war no one talked about. Others claimed he was part of a forgotten covert unit, the kind of stories that lived only in classified files and denied transcripts. But none of them could explain why a war-hardened canine like Valor, a legend among handlers for his unbreakable discipline, refused to leave the janitor's side. And none of them could understand why, in the dead of night, Valor would sometimes rise and pace in slow circles around that cot, his nose pressed low to the floorboards, his body tense with the restless energy of a soldier waiting for orders that might never come. Whatever lay hidden beneath that room wasn't just a secret. It was a promise sealed in silence and sacrifice. And as the hours dragged toward dawn, one thing became painfully clear. Valor hadn't just found his old commander. He had returned to fulfill a duty that was far from over. The night air over Briarwood turned sharp and cold, the kind that settled into your bones and made every shadow feel heavier, more deliberate. Down at Milner's diner, the regular hum of conversation had dulled to a low murmur as unfamiliar faces occupied corner booths, their gazes hidden behind dark glasses even under the dim yellow glow of flickering neon signs. They didn't order much, just sat with cold coffee and eyes that seemed to catalog every movement, every local who walked through the door. No one knew their names, but everyone felt their presence like a bad omen clinging to the town's quiet corners. By the time the last streetlight flickered out near the southern edge of town, the black sedans had multiplied, lining up like silent sentinels along the cracked roads leading toward Briarwood High. That's when the real storm broke loose. Not the kind that shakes windows with thunder, but the kind that arrives on feet softer than rain and more dangerous than any weather pattern could predict. Somewhere between midnight and the hour where nightmares bleed into waking life, a silent alarm tripped in the old janitor's wing. But by the time the local police responded, the intruders were long gone, slipping through the night like ghosts trained in the art of vanishing. The principal's office remained untouched, every classroom undisturbed, but the janitor's closet, the one no one ever bothered to notice, was left wide open, the heavy padlock cut clean through like butter. The officers stood in the doorway, their flashlights sweeping across overturned cleaning supplies and scattered personal belongings. But it wasn't the mess that stopped them cold. It was the single black playing card left on the small metal cot. It stood propped upright against an old photograph like a silent threat, A silver scorpion etched into its surface so finely it seemed to shimmer under the flashlight's beam. Mr. Holden arrived without being summoned, his face ashen and his shoulders drawn tight as piano wire. His eyes locked onto that card and, for the first time, the man who had mastered the art of blending into the background looked as though every mile he had ever walked came crashing down on him all at once. His lips parted, his voice dry as desert sand, and with a barely audible breath, he spoke words that turned the air ice cold. "They found me." It wasn't a question. It wasn't fear. It was resignation. And in that moment, the weight of every unspoken chapter in his life pressed down on the walls of that forgotten room. Outside, Valor growled low and dangerous, pacing at the door like he could sense the darkness creeping ever closer. And as Mr. Holden picked up that black card with fingers that trembled, despite his best efforts, he knew that the past he'd buried beneath years of mopping floors and faded flannel wasn't content to remain hidden anymore. The scorpion had stirred from its nest, and it was coming with venom sharp enough to pierce through the quiet life he had tried so hard to build. Jamie had never been good at leaving things alone, not when his gut told him a story was unfolding that would make every warning bell in his mind ring louder than the principal's constant threats of expulsion. So when he saw Mr. Holden walking alone after school, his shoulders hunched against the biting wind and his pace quicker than usual, Jamie slipped into the shadows and followed. The streets grew narrower as they moved beyond the town's edge, where buildings stood half-collapsed and forgotten, their windows like dark, hollow eyes watching over secrets that had long since been abandoned. Rain drizzled from a gray sky, turning the cracked pavement slick and treacherous, but Jamie kept his distance, heart pounding against his ribs with every careful step. He followed the old janitor through a chain-link fence that hung uselessly from broken posts, and down a hidden path swallowed by overgrown weeds and the skeletal remains of a crumbling stone foundation. Mr. Holden stopped near the center of what must have once been a building of importance, its purpose long erased by time and neglect. With a grunt, he knelt and began tearing at the earth with his bare hands, the rain turning dirt to mud as he unearthed something hidden deep beneath the ground. Jamie crept closer, his breath shallow, his eyes straining through the gloom, and when he saw the rusted edges of an old ammunition crate emerge from the soil, a chill slithered up his spine. Mr. Holden worked with the precision of a man who had done this before, his fingers moving over the crate's latches with muscle memory as if it had been only yesterday since he last opened it. The lid creaked in protest, and inside lay a grim inventory of the past. Cold steel weapons wrapped in oil-stained cloth, their surfaces marked by years of use in places most people couldn't pronounce. Jamie's gaze darted to the other contents, a bundle of aged photographs, their corners frayed, images of men in uniforms without insignias, their faces hard and their eyes hollow. And there, resting atop the pile like a crown atop forgotten relics, was a medal dulled by time yet unmistakable in its gravity, the inscription still legible even through the grime. For valor beyond duty. Jamie's mind raced, questions piling up faster than his heart could keep pace, and that's when he heard it. The unmistakable, soul-freezing click of a safety being released directly behind him. His body locked up, every instinct screaming at him to run, but his feet felt nailed to the ground. Slowly, painfully, he turned his head and saw the glint of a weapon aimed straight at him, held by a figure emerging from the shadows of the collapsed walls. The man's face was a roadmap of scars, his eyes cold and unreadable, his voice a low, dangerous rasp. "You've seen too much, kid," he said, and in that heartbeat between life and death, Jamie realized he had stumbled into a world where curiosity didn't just kill the cat. It came with a price he might not be ready to pay. The rain fell harder, as if the sky itself understood the gravity of the moment, each droplet exploding against the broken concrete like tiny warnings. Jamie stood frozen, the cold barrel of the gun pressed against his temple, his heart thundering loud enough to drown out the storm. The man holding the weapon was a specter of violence, his face carved by a jagged scar that started above his left brow and cut a brutal line down to his jaw. The kind of scar you didn't get by accident, the kind you earned in places where death was a daily companion. His finger tightened on the trigger, and Jamie could see it clearly now. The man's eyes were empty, void of hesitation, the kind of eyes that had seen too much and cared too little. But then, like a figure rising from the depths of a forgotten nightmare, Mr. Holden stepped into the open, his posture straight despite the years and the weight of everything he'd buried. His hands were raised, but his voice carried a command so sharp it seemed to slice through the downpour and into the heart of the man called Marcus. "Stand down, Marcus. The boy's not our enemy." For a heartbeat, nothing moved, the air thick with the unspoken language of soldiers who'd shared lifetimes of blood and regret. Marcus's jaw clenched, his eyes flicking between Jamie and the man he had once followed into battles no history book would ever admit happened. Slowly, painfully, the gun lowered, but the threat in his stare remained. Jamie gasped for air like a drowning man breaking the surface, his legs weak but his mind racing to piece together what he'd just witnessed. Mr. Holden approached with slow, deliberate steps, his eyes never leaving Marcus. "We don't kill children, not even now," he said, his voice quieter but no less dangerous. That's when Jamie saw it, etched into Mr. Holden's exposed forearm as the rain plastered his flannel to his skin. The same emblem he'd seen before, the scorpion poised to strike. And suddenly, the pieces fit. Captain Elias Holden wasn't just a janitor with a hidden past. He was the leader of something that wasn't supposed to exist, a covert unit known as the Brotherhood of Shadows. Soldiers trained for missions that were never acknowledged, their existence scrubbed clean by the very country they served. Disavowed, forgotten, hunted like criminals by the same agencies that once crafted them into ghosts. Marcus spoke then, his voice rough like gravel dragged over rusted metal. "You think they'll spare him, Elias? You think they'll spare any of us?" Mr. Holden's eyes darkened, a haunted flicker passing through them before he turned to Jamie. "You shouldn't have followed me, kid," he said quietly, his gaze full of regret and something colder, acceptance. "Now you're in it, and there's no going back." And in that rain-soaked ruin, under the watchful eyes of ghosts from a past that refused to stay buried, Jamie understood that his life had just crossed a line, and whatever came next, innocence was a luxury he'd never reclaim. By dawn, the streets of Briarwood felt different, like the quiet before a storm you couldn't see but could feel crawling beneath your skin. Word spread through back channels and whispered conversations that the black-suited men were back, their presence more brazen than before. Their dark sedans parked along the outskirts like vultures waiting for something to die. But this time, they weren't just watching. They were hunting. Their leader, a man known only in hushed tones as Bishop, had arrived, and with him came a vendetta years in the making. Bishop wasn't a man who forgot, and he certainly wasn't one to forgive. Where others saw a broken-down janitor clinging to the last threads of obscurity, Bishop saw the one man who had outmaneuvered him, humiliated him in the field, and escaped the reckoning meant to end him. And now, Bishop wanted what had been buried deep beneath Briarwood High. A hidden cache that wasn't just a relic of war, but a key to unlocking operations so black they were practically myth. Captain Holden had once sworn a blood oath to protect it, even if it meant dying on the very ground it was hidden under. And that oath, like the inked scorpion on his arm, was a promise that had never faded. Jamie watched from the shadows near the school gates, his fists clenched at his sides, his mind still reeling from everything he'd learned. Valor stood beside him like a living statue, his ears pinned back, his body tense, eyes locked on the horizon as if he could already sense the approach of old enemies. There was something about the way the dog stood, silent and unyielding, that told Jamie this wasn't just another day at Briarwood. This was something far bigger, something that would either end in history books that no one would ever read, or in a silence so complete it would erase every trace of what was about to unfold. Jamie turned his eyes to the school's crumbling facade. understanding for the first time that this wasn't just a building full of forgotten classrooms and broken dreams. It was a final battlefield. Somewhere beneath its cracked foundations and peeling walls lay the reason men like Bishop were willing to kill without hesitation, and the reason Captain Holden had spent every year since his exile guarding these grounds like a soldier at his final post. And as the first of the black sedans rolled slowly toward the gates, windows dark as obsidian and engines whispering death, Jamie understood that the war wasn't just a thing of the past. It had found its way to his backyard, and whether he was ready or not, he was standing in the middle of it. The night swallowed Briarwood High in a darkness so complete it felt like the world had folded in on itself. The broken halls and shattered windows cloaked beneath a sky starved of light. The black sedans returned without warning, their engines nothing more than a whisper against the cracked pavement as they glided into position like predators circling wounded prey. Their doors opened in perfect unison, and from their depths emerged men dressed in shadows, their faces hidden beneath tactical masks, their movements as smooth and deadly as the blades strapped to their sides. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have predicted, was that this forgotten place was not as defenseless as it seemed. In the heart of the school, beneath the sagging beams and flickering emergency lights, Captain Elias Holden stood in the center of the old gymnasium, his shoulders squared and his eyes locked on the main entrance as if he could already see the ghosts of his past storming through. Beside him, Valor crouched low, his body coiled like a spring, his eyes burning with the silent promise of loyalty that no command could shake. And in the shadows just beyond the crumbling bleachers, Jamie crouched with his heart pounding like a drumbeat of war, a flashlight gripped in one trembling hand and a makeshift radio clutched in the other, his mind replaying every bit of training Holden had drilled into him over the past 3 days. 3 days that felt like a lifetime compressed into every harsh lesson about survival, about courage, about standing your ground when running was no longer an option. The first breach came fast, a back door forced open with surgical precision, the sound barely audible over the distant rumble of a gathering storm. Holden raised a hand, and everything went still. Jamie's breath caught in his throat as the enemy slipped into the corridors, moving like shadows made flesh, their eyes scanning the darkness, their boots silent against the tiled floors. But they weren't alone in the dark. From the far end of the hallway, a low growl echoed through the stillness, deep and menacing, the sound of a predator announcing his territory. Valor moved first, a blur of muscle and fury as he launched himself at the lead intruder, his massive frame colliding with the man like a battering ram wrapped in teeth and raw power. Chaos erupted as the lights flickered and failed, the school plunging into absolute blackness. Flashbangs cracked through the dark, their bursts of light painting nightmarish scenes across the ruined walls. Valor tearing through the line, Holden moving with the lethal grace of a man who had lived too long in the shadow of death, and Jamie, shaking but determined, using the chaos to move unseen, relaying positions through the static of the battered radio. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a final reckoning. Every step through those halls was a step through Holden's past. Every bullet that echoed through the empty corridors was a reminder of the promises made in the dead of night under foreign skies. And as dawn crept slowly toward the horizon, the siege of Briarwood High raged on, a battle fought not for glory, but for the right to finally lay the past to rest. Dawn crept over Briarwood High like a reluctant truth, its pale light struggling to wash away the scars of the night before. Smoke still curled in lazy spirals above the shattered remains of the western wing, the acrid scent of gunpowder lingering in the cold morning air. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing quieter as emergency crews pulled back, their presence a formality in the wake of a battle they would never fully understand. The halls were silent now, but they carried the weight of everything that had happened. Bullet holes pocked the faded lockers, bloodstains darkened the cracked linoleum floors, and here and there lay remnants of a war that was never supposed to reach this quiet corner of the world. Amid the wreckage, Jamie stood in the center of the courtyard, his eyes scanning the horizon for a figure he knew he'd never see again. Captain Elias Holden was gone. Some said he slipped away before the first light broke through the mist, disappearing into the fog like the ghost he had always been. While others whispered that the Brotherhood of Shadows had come for him at last, taking their lost commander back into the darkness where he belonged. But no matter the theory, the truth hung in the air as thick as the smoke. Holden had left behind more than broken memories. He had left behind a legacy. In the center of the courtyard, where the old flagpole once stood, a new plaque gleamed under the rising sun. Its surface was simple, its message etched with quiet reverence. To those who fought in silence, and to the battles never seen, your sacrifice will not be forgotten. No names were listed, no ranks or medals displayed, just the symbol of the scorpion engraved at the base, its tail curled, a silent reminder of the unseen wars waged in the darkest corners of the world. Valor stood beside Jamie, his massive frame unmoving, his eyes fixed on the horizon as if waiting for the return of a commander who would never come. And though the great dog bore his own wounds, his presence remained a pillar of strength, a sentinel guarding not just the boy at his side, but the memory of a man who had given everything to protect a secret he could no longer carry alone. As the wind stirred through, the empty halls, it carried more than the scent of smoke. It carried echoes, soft and haunting, like the distant murmur of a voice promising that some debts had finally been paid, that some ghosts could at last find rest. And though life at Briarwood would eventually return to its ordinary rhythms, though new paint would cover the bullet holes and the lockers would be replaced, some things would never truly fade. Because legends aren't measured by parades or medals. They are measured by the silence left behind when the hero walks away, and by the hearts that beat a little stronger, knowing they once stood in the presence of a man who chose honor over oblivion.